The American flag hanging outside Cora Pritchard's porch had seen more seasons than most men in Calico Creek, Texas, and in the dying amber light of an October evening in 1878, it was her needle and thread that kept it alive. She sat in the old rocking chair her husband Eli had built the first winter they had moved to this land, her fingers working the frayed hem of the flag's lower stripe with a precision that came from years of practice. The chair creaked a slow rhythm against the warped planks of the porch, keeping time with the crickets beginning their evening song out in the tall grass. The flag had been a gift from the town council 3 years prior, presented to her after Eli was buried on the hill behind the church, a gesture of gratitude for the years he had served as Calico Creek's first elected sheriff. The council had said it was a symbol of honor. Cora had accepted it as such, though on certain evenings, when the loneliness pressed against her like a hand against her chest, she wondered if it was also a reminder that the town had moved on while she had remained fixed in place, like a fence post driven too deep to pull free. She had been mending the flag every season for 3 years now. Spring brought the thin rips that came from winter winds and ice. Summer loosened the stitching along the canton, where the blue field met the red and white stripes. Autumn frayed the edges, and winter demanded the most careful attention of all, when the fabric stiffened in the cold and the threads pulled tight as a bowstring. Cora tended it the way she tended her vegetable garden and her small apple orchard, and the 2 horses she kept in the paddock beside the house. With quiet determination, with no audience required, with the kind of steady devotion that asked for nothing in return. She was 32 years old and had lived alone in this house for 3 years and 3 months. Her daughter, Lily, who was 8, was inside at the kitchen table finishing her reading lesson. Cora could hear the slow, careful voice of the child sounding out words from the primer book, stumbling a little over the longer ones but never giving up, and the sound of it filled her with the particular warmth that only Lily could produce. The sun was lower now, painting the flat Texas landscape in colors that a painter would have wept over. Burnt orange and rose, and a deep bruised violet at the edges of everything. The main road that ran past Cora's property connected the northern ranches and homesteads to the center of Calico Creek, which sat about a mile south, and it was along this road that she heard the sound of hooves coming at a steady walk. She did not look up right away. Riders passed by often enough. She had learned in her first year of widowhood that looking up at every passing stranger only invited conversations she did not have the energy for. She kept her needle moving, pulling a thread of red through the fabric with careful fingers, reinforcing a stripe that had nearly come apart at the seam. But the hooves slowed. She heard them clearly slow, not in the way a tired horse naturally found a gentler pace, but in the deliberate way that a rider pulls back on the reins when something catches his eye. She glanced up then, from beneath the brim of her sunbonnet, and saw a man on a dark bay horse pulled up at the edge of her property line. He was tall in the saddle, broad through the shoulders, wearing a worn canvas duster that had clearly seen 1,000 miles of use. His hat was a deep brown that might once have been black, and beneath its brim was a face that was weathered and square-jawed, with dark eyes set under heavy brows that were, at that precise moment, fixed entirely on her flag. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the flag. His horse stood still as a statue in the road, and the man's head was tilted just slightly, the way a person tilts when they are seeing something that requires more than a passing glance. There was something in his expression that she could not quite read at this distance, something between reverence and sadness, and it kept her from speaking for a moment longer than was polite. "Evening," she finally said. He pulled his gaze from the flag to her, and there was a brief moment of something shifting in his face before he settled it into a more neutral expression. "Evening, ma'am," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, the voice of a man who chose his words the way he chose his tools. "Forgive me for stopping. I did not mean to stare." "You were looking at the flag," she said. "It was not an accusation, merely an observation." "I was," he admitted, He shifted slightly in the saddle, and she could see that he was perhaps 35 or 36, not an old man, but one who had been lived in thoroughly by the life he had chosen. My father had a flag like that, before the war. I have not seen one that old being kept up so carefully in a long time. Cora looked at the flag she held, then back at him. It wants to come apart every season. I just refuse to let it. Something passed across his face then, a quick and quiet thing like light moving fast over water. That is a good way to be, he said. She set her work in her lap for a moment, studying him with the directness she had earned the right to through 3 years of managing everything on her own. Are you passing through, or have you business in Calico Creek? I have land north of here, he said. The Wallace spread. I have been down south seeing to some cattle business, and I am heading back. You are Clark Wallace, she said. He blinked, and the corner of his mouth shifted in what was almost a smile. I am, and you have the advantage of me, ma'am. Cora Pritchard, she said. My husband was Eli Pritchard. He was the sheriff here before he passed. Clark Wallace pulled his hat from his head and held it against his chest for a moment. I knew Eli, he said, and his voice dropped a half note. Not well. We spoke at the stockyard a few times. He was a good man. He was, Cora said simply. There was a comfortable silence that should have felt awkward and did not, which was itself a kind of surprise. Clark Wallace turned his hat in his hands once, then settled it back onto his head. I should let you get on with your evening, Mrs. Pritchard. You should, she agreed, but there was no sharpness in it. He touched the brim of his hat to her and turned his horse back to the road. She watched him go, his horse's hooves raising small puffs of dust in the dry October air, and then she looked back down at the flag in her hands and found that her needle had gone still without her telling it to. Inside the house, Lily called out that she had finished her reading, and Cora set aside the half-mended flag and went inside to hear her daughter read aloud the last page of the chapter. And by the time she came back out to finish her mending, the road was empty, and the sky was full of the first cold stars of the season. She thought about Clark Wallace and his expression when he had looked at the flag, that particular weight that a man carries when a thing reminds him of someone he has lost, and she understood it in the way that only a person who carries the same weight can understand it. She thought about it briefly, and then she set the thought aside and finished her mending, because the flag needed tending and October was not a patient month. 3 days passed before she saw him again. She was in Calico Creek proper, at Hatcher's General Store, loading her weekly supplies into the bed of her small wagon. Lily was beside her, gripping a small paper bag of horehound candy that Cora had bought her as a treat, and both of them were working together to manage the flour sack that was more than either of them alone could carry easily. Here, let me. She looked up, and Clark Wallace was there, his hat already coming off, reaching for the flour sack with both hands. He was dressed for town in a clean blue shirt and dark trousers, his duster replaced by a heavier canvas coat against the October chill. He looked different on foot than he had on horseback, though no less solidly built. I have it, Cora said, which was not entirely true. I know you have it, he said, with a gentleness that took the edge from the situation. I would just like to help. She let him take the flour. He settled it in the wagon bed with an ease that made her want to be briefly annoyed at how simply strong men made the heavy things look. She straightened up and looked at him squarely. Thank you, she said. You are welcome, he said. He looked down at Lily then and offered the child a nod of greeting that was formal and respectful in the way that a man greets a small person he does not want to fright. Good afternoon. Lily looked up at him with her mother's direct gaze in a smaller face. Good afternoon, she said carefully. Are you a cowboy? Lily, Cora said, but Clark Wallace had crouched down to the child's level with the slow care of a large man, making himself unthreatening, and his expression had softened considerably. I am a rancher, he said. That is something like a cowboy, but with more paperwork. Lily considered this seriously. Do you have horses? I have 14 horses, he said. The child's eyes widened to remarkable proportions. Mama only has 2. Your mama's 2 horses are probably a great deal better behaved than most of my 14, he said, and glanced up at Cora with an expression that made the corner of her mouth pull upward against her will. He stood back up, and they stood for a moment in the mild awkwardness of 2 people who have spoken before, but do not quite know yet what they are to each other. Around them, Calico Creek moved in its usual rhythms. Old Pete Sutter was sweeping the boardwalk in front of his barber shop. The blacksmith's hammer rang from down the block. 2 women from the Methodist church were engaged in the kind of whispered conversation that was certainly about someone else's business. I was glad to see the flag was looking better when I rode past yesterday, Clark said. You rode past yesterday, Cora said. I did. You did not stop. No, he said. He looked directly at her when he said it without apology or explanation, and somehow that directness was more honest than any explanation he might have offered. Well, she said, it will need attention again before December. The wind up here picks up considerably in November. I imagine it does, he said. She loaded the last of her supplies and helped Lily up onto the wagon seat, then climbed up herself and gathered the reins. Clark Wallace stood at the side of the wagon with his hat in his hands in the way she was already beginning to recognize. That particular posture of a man who has something more to say and is deciding whether to say it. If you ever need anything, Mrs. Pritchard, he said finally, my ranch is 3 miles north on the main road. I have hands that can be spared for repairs or heavy work. I have managed well enough on my own, she said, and meant it, though she said it without the defensiveness that the words sometimes carried. I believe you entirely, he said. The offer stands regardless. She clicked to her horse and the wagon moved off. She did not look back. But she was aware, with a precision she could not entirely account for, of exactly where he was standing as she drove away. November arrived in Calico Creek with a cold wind out of the northwest that rattled the windows of Cora's house and stripped the last leaves from her apple trees in a single aggressive night. She brought the flag inside for its November inspection, spreading it across the kitchen table after Lily was in bed, and worked by lamplight to assess the damage. It was the worst it had been in 2 years. The November wind had found a weakness along the top edge she had not noticed in October, and a 4-inch tear had opened up along the 3rd red stripe from the top. The canton, which she had reinforced in August, had held well enough, but the brass grommet on the lower corner had pulled away from the fabric entirely, leaving a ragged hole that would need a backing patch before it could be rehemmed. She sat at the table for a long moment looking at the damage, and felt the familiar quiet stubbornness rise in her the way it always did when something needed more work than she had planned for. She had done harder things. She would do this one too. She was deep into the work an hour later, her reading glasses on, her needle moving in the tight, careful stitches that she had learned from her mother and her mother's mother before that, when she heard boots on her porch steps. She went still. 3 sharp knocks at the door. She set her needle down and moved to the door with the practical calm of a woman who had lived on the Texas frontier long enough to know that panic was rarely useful. She opened it without unbolting the upper lock first, which her late husband would have gently scolded her for, and found Clark Wallace on her porch with his hat in his hands. The cold had put color into his face. He was carrying, of all things, a small tin lantern in his other hand, as though he had been using it to navigate the dark road. Mr. Wallace, she said. Mrs. Pritchard. He looked immediately self-conscious in the way that large, confident men look self-conscious when they realize they have done something that requires explaining. I apologize for the hour. I was riding back from town and I saw your light still on and I wanted to. He stopped, started again. I had been meaning to bring this over. He held out a small paper-wrapped package. She looked at it. What is it? Brass grommet sets, he said, and some backing canvas. I was in the dry goods over in Farley last week, and I noticed they had them in stock, and I thought they might be of use to you. Cora looked at the package and then at his face and felt something very careful begin to happen somewhere in the neighborhood of her ribs. You bought sewing supplies for my flag, she said. I did, he said, as though he had only just fully registered how this might appear. It seemed practical. "It is very practical," she said. They stood for a moment in the open doorway with the cold night air moving between them, and Cora stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in out of the cold," she said. "I have coffee on." He hesitated for exactly 1 second, which she noted as a point in his favor. A man who walked right into a widow's house without any pause at all was either oblivious or presumptuous, and Clark Wallace seemed to be neither. He came inside and stood in her kitchen looking at the flag spread across her table with the same expression she had seen on his face from the road that first evening. That wait, that long, quiet feeling. "My father flew a flag like this one outside his house in Georgia," he said, sitting in the chair she indicated at the table. "Before the war. We had to take it down when Sherman's army came through. He never put it back up. He died in '71, not ever having put it back up." Cora poured coffee and set a cup in front of him and sat back down to her mending. "Is that why you looked at it that way the first evening?" she asked. "I suppose it is," he said. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "It is a small thing, but it is not a small thing." "No," she said, "it is not." She worked and he drank his coffee, and outside the November wind pushed at the house in long, pressing gusts, and neither of them spoke for several minutes, and neither of them minded the quiet. It was the kind of quiet that either means nothing at all or means a very great deal, and Cora was beginning to suspect it was the latter. "You do not have to do this alone, you know," he said at length. "Not about the flag specifically." She could hear that the words were wider than the flag. "I have been doing it alone for 3 years," she said, not defensively. "I know," he said. "I have been doing most things alone for about the same amount of time." She looked up at that. "You lost someone." "My wife," he said. "Rebecca. Fever in the spring of '75. We had been married 4 years." He said it the way people say things they have said many times, not because they have gotten used to the grief, but because they have learned to carry it without dropping everything else. "I am sorry," Cora said. "Thank you," he said. "And I am sorry for Eli." They looked at each other across the kitchen table with the flag between them, and there was in that look an acknowledgment of shared terrain, the particular country of loss that no one can enter from the outside and no one who has entered it can fully explain to those who have not. "Did you and Rebecca have children?" Cora asked. He shook his head. "We did not. We hoped for them. It did not happen." He turned his cup in his hands. "Your daughter seems like a fine girl." "She is the finest person I know," Cora said simply, and meant it with her whole heart. Clark smiled at that, and it was the first full smile she had seen from him, and it changed his face significantly, made it younger and warmer and considerably more dangerous to look at for any sustained period. She returned her attention to the flag. He left an hour later, after a second cup of coffee, and a conversation that ranged from the coming winter to the state of the cattle market, to the question of whether Mayor Aldrich would actually follow through on his promise to get the main road properly graded before spring. He left the grommet sets and the canvas on her table, and when she stood at the door watching him mount his horse, she noticed that he moved with the ease of a man who had grown up on horseback, every motion efficient and unshowy. "Thank you for the supplies," she said. "Thank you for the coffee," he said. He rode north into the dark, his lantern making a small, warm point of light against the black of the road, and Cora stood on her porch in the cold for a moment after he had gone, the mended part of the flag already beginning to feel more solid under her fingertips. She went back inside and finished the work. By midnight she had the grommet set properly, the backing patch firmly in place, the tier along the third stripe nearly invisible to any eye that had not known it was there. She folded the flag carefully, the way a soldier would fold it, and set it on the shelf beside the door where it lived between seasons. She thought about Clark Wallace for a while before sleep came, and told herself that there was nothing unusual in thinking about a man who had been kind, and that the thinking would settle after a few days, and that she was not the sort of woman who would let herself be swayed by a broad pair of shoulders and a quiet way of speaking, and a story about a father's flag that had never gone back up. She told herself all of that, and then she lay awake for another hour anyway. December brought hard frost and a particular cold that settled over the land with a permanent quality, as though it intended to stay through the rest of history. Cora cut firewood, managed her horses, mended fences when the ground was not too hard, drove Lily to the schoolhouse in town 3 mornings a week, and kept her household running with the methodical efficiency she had always preferred to sentiment. Clark Wallace rode by on a Tuesday morning of the 2nd week of December and stopped his horse and looked at the flag, which was flying on the pole Eli had set in the corner of the porch railing, its new grommet gleaming brass in the thin winter light. "It looks good," he called from the road. "It held up through that last storm very well," she called back from the porch where she was pulling on her coat to go check on the horses. "I am riding to the stockyard in Farley today," he said. "Is there anything you need from town that I could bring back on my way?" She stood for a moment on the porch steps, looking at him in the cold morning light, his breath misting, his horse alert and steady beneath him. She thought about saying no thank you and meaning it. She had said no thank you to many offers over 3 years. "Sugar," she said. "A 5-pound sack if they have it. I have been short and I do not want to make the drive myself in this cold." "Sugar," he said, with a gravity that suggested he was committing it to memory. "I will bring it by this evening. What do I owe you for the trouble?" "Nothing," he said. "It is 2 miles out of my way at most. I have been known to cover that distance for considerably less reason." She found herself smiling at that, a quick and genuine thing that she could not have stopped if she had tried. "I will have coffee ready," she said. "Then I will be sure to arrive before it gets cold," he said. He brought the sugar that evening and stayed for dinner, because Lily asked him to in the open and hopeful way that children ask for things, without guile or strategic calculation, and Clark looked at Cora with an expression that offered to leave if she preferred, and Cora looked at the pot of stew on the stove and said there was more than enough. They ate together at the kitchen table, and Lily told Clark everything about her school lessons, and about the cat that had recently taken up residence in the barn, and about her opinion of horehound candy versus peppermint, which she shared at considerable length. Clark listened to all of it with the complete attention he would have given a business partner, which made Lily beam and made Cora feel something she could not quite name, something warm and slightly terrifying. After Lily was in bed, Clark helped Cora wash the dishes, which she had not asked him to do and which struck her, more than anything else he had done, as the action of a man who did not think about helping as a performance but simply as what one did. "You are very good with her," Cora said, handing him a wet plate to dry. "She is easy to be good with," he said. "She has got your directness." "Is that a compliment to her or a comment on me?" "Both," he said, with that quiet smile, and she turned back to the wash basin before he could see the effect it had on her face. January arrived, and with it the hardest winter Calico Creek had seen since 1872. Snow fell over 3 consecutive nights and left the countryside locked and white and silent in a way that reminded Cora of the inside of a held breath. The roads became difficult and sometimes impossible, and for a stretch of 8 days, she and Lily were largely confined to the property. It was on the 5th of those days that she heard a horse in the yard and looked out the frost-edged window to see Clark Wallace dismounting near the paddock, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. She opened the door and stood in it looking at him. "You came through that road," she said. "The north section is not as bad as the south," he said. He tied the horses and came toward the house with his coat white-crusted on the shoulders. "I was concerned you might be running low on wood and provisions." "I have managed winters before," she said, but she held the door open for him because the cold was ferocious and he had ridden several miles in it, and she was not a woman who let stubbornness make her inhospitable. He brought in the supplies, which included not only wood and food stores but a small carved wooden horse that he set on the kitchen table with no ceremony whatsoever, clearly intended for Lily, and said nothing about it until Lily came running from the back room and spotted it and let out a sound of pure joy that could have been heard in the next county. "Did you make that?" Cora asked him later when Lily had taken her new horse to show to the real horses in the paddock, well wrapped and visibly delighted. "In the evenings," he said. He was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands because they had been talking for 20 minutes and he kept forgetting to drink it. "I carve when the winter keeps me inside. I have made worse things." "It is beautifully made," she said. He looked at his hands. "I am glad she likes it." The snow kept him at the house for most of the afternoon because the temperature dropped further, and both of them knew it was foolish to send a man back out into it just for the sake of propriety. They played cards with Lily, a game the child clearly made up the rules for as she went along and which she won decisively. They drank more coffee. Cora made corn bread and they ate it at the table. When the temperature had lifted enough for safe riding, Clark stood and thanked her for the hospitality and put on his coat and hat. Lily hugged him around the knees, which appeared to surprise him considerably, and he put one large hand very briefly on the top of her head before she ran off again with her carved horse. Cora walked him to the door. The evening was blue and cold, and the snow was blue too in the dying light, and everything was very quiet. "You did not have to do this," she said. "I know," he said. "But I am glad you did," she said, and it cost her something to say it. A small but real surrender of the careful self-sufficiency she had been tending as carefully as the flag. He looked at her for a moment in that steady way he had, as though he was reading something printed in very small type. "So am I," he said. She stood at the door and watched him ride away north through the blue snow and the gathering dark, and this time she stayed there longer before going back inside. February came, and the town of Calico Creek began its slow thaw. The first pale green pushed up along the road edges, and the creek that ran behind the church unfroze with a sound like something exhaling after a long-held breath. Cora brought out her mending kit and examined the flag again, as she did at the transition of every season, checking for the damage that winter inevitably left. Clark had taken to stopping on his way to and from town several times a week. It was not always for long. Sometimes it was only to hand over a bit of news from Calico Creek, or to let Lily pet his horse, or to share a brief exchange from the road. But the stopping had become a certainty in her days, a small fixed point around which other things quietly organized themselves. She had not spoken to anyone in Calico Creek about this. She did not need to, because people in small towns speak on your behalf whether you participate or not, and she had been aware for several weeks of the way conversation adjusted itself when she walked into Hatcher's, of the knowing looks between certain women of the Methodist Church, of the way Harlan Hatcher himself smiled somewhat too broadly when she purchased her goods. She was not embarrassed by the talking. She had lived in this town long enough to understand that gossip was its primary weather pattern, constant and capable of both warmth and damage. What she was, instead, was cautious. She had built a life in 3 years of widowhood that was honest and stable and her own, and she would not disrupt it for a man simply because he was decent and kind, and made the cold months feel less long. Or so she told herself in the evenings before sleep came. March arrived, and with it the first real warmth, and Cora was on the porch in the afternoon sunshine with the flag across her lap, working on the seasonal maintenance, when Clark rode up and stopped as he always did and looked at the flag, and then at her with that expression she had come to know as well as the flag's own patterns. But today he dismounted, which was different. He tied his horse to the porch rail and came up the steps and stood for a moment looking at the flag in her hands. "May I sit?" he asked. She gestured to the other chair, the wooden one without the cushion, which had been Eli's chair in his living years and which she had never thrown out but had also never offered to anyone before. Clark sat in it and stretched his long legs out and looked at the view from her porch, which was the flat grass country rolling south toward the tree line along the creek, and the distant roof peaks of Calico Creek proper, and the big blue March sky moving with white clouds. "I need to say something to you," he said, and his voice had a different quality than usual, the carefully controlled tension of a man who has made a decision. "All right," she said. She kept her hands in the flag working because it was easier to listen to important things if she had something to do with her hands. "I am aware that I have no right to say this," he said. "You have not indicated that you would welcome it, and if you tell me to stop coming by, I will understand it and I will respect it completely." "Clark," she said. He looked at her. "Say the thing," she said. "I am not fragile." He looked at her for another moment, and then he said, "I have not felt about anyone the way I am beginning to feel about you since Rebecca. And I would not dishonor her memory or yours by pretending otherwise or by rushing you or by making you feel any kind of pressure that you do not want. But I would rather tell you honestly than have you not know." She held very still. The flag was quiet in her hands. On the road, a wagon passed in the middle distance. The drivers had a small dot moving south. "I have been telling myself that it was neighborliness," she said. "So have I," he admitted. "It is not neighborliness," she said. "No," he said. "It is not." She looked out at the country rolling away from them, the grass going green now, the sky enormous, the world wide open the way it was in March after the winter had been long. "I am not a simple woman to be with," she said. "I have a daughter who is everything to me. I have a house I have kept on my own and I intend to keep keeping it. I am not looking to be rescued or managed." "I know that," he said, "and I would not want any of those things. I like the way you run your house. I like that you mend the flag yourself. I like that you told Lily she could name the barn cat even though it weighs about as much as a loaf of bread and is probably more trouble than it is worth." She laughed at that, an involuntary sound, bright and genuine. "His name is Captain," she said. "She named him Captain." "Of course she did," he said, smiling. And for a moment they were both simply happy, sitting on her porch in the March sunshine with the flag between them, and the feeling was so clean and uncomplicated that it almost made Cora's throat tight. "I would like to see where this goes," she said carefully. "I am not making promises, but I am not asking you to stop coming by either." Clark Wallace nodded slowly, as though he was receiving news of significant weight and wanted to receive it properly. "That is more than I expected," he said, "and it is enough." They sat together on the porch while the afternoon deepened, and she finished the season's mending with him in the old chair beside her, and neither of them said anything particularly important for the rest of the hour, but the quality of the quiet between them had changed, and they both knew it. Spring opened Calico Creek like a book. The town stirred back to life after winter's confinement with the particular energy of people too long cooped indoors, and the calendar filled with the things that small Texas towns filled their springs with. The church social, the stockmen's meeting at the Grange Hall, the preparation for the summer cattle drive season that would bring drovers and their noise through the main road for months. Clark came to the church social as an ordinary attendee, and Cora came as herself, and they spoke to each other with the careful casualness of people who are not yet certain what they are, but whose careful casualness fools absolutely no one in a town of 400. Reverend Marsh shook Clark's hand for exactly a beat too long and glanced at Cora with a satisfaction he did not bother to conceal. The Methodist women made pointed comments about what a nice man Mr. Wallace was, and wasn't it wonderful he still came to town events, and didn't Lily seem to be thriving? Lily was, in fact, thriving. She had become openly fond of Clark in the uncomplicated way children become fond of people who pay them genuine attention, and she had taken to asking him questions of increasing ambition. She had recently asked him what the furthest place he had ever been was, and he had told her about seeing the Mississippi River in his youth, which had sent her into a week-long preoccupation with rivers. He brought a book about American geography for Lily in April. He brought it without any announcement, simply left it on the kitchen table the next time he came for coffee, and Lily fell on it with a reverence that she usually reserved for the horehound candy. Cora watched her daughter spread the book open on the floor and trace the lines of rivers with her small finger, and felt a feeling she did not examine too closely, because examining it would require her to name it. She named it one evening in May. They had been sitting on the porch after Lily was in bed, which had become a habit neither of them had explicitly agreed to, but which had established itself as firmly as any formal arrangement. The evening was warm and the nighthawks were out, circling in the violet sky, and the flag was flying cleanly on its pole in the first truly good weather of the year. "Clark," she said. He said. He was whittling something, which he did with the same focused calm with which she sewed, and the small curl of wood fell from his knife in a steady stream. "I think I am falling in love with you," she said. She said it the way she said most important things, directly, without excessive preparation, because she had found over 32 years of living that the waiting never made the important things easier. He stopped whittling. He set the wood and the knife on the porch rail very carefully and turned in his chair to look at her. "Cora," he said. "You do not have to respond immediately," she said, though her heart was doing something extremely undignified in her chest. "I am not gathering myself because I am uncertain," he said. "I am gathering myself because I want to say this right." He held her gaze with a steadiness that she had come to trust entirely. "I have been in love with you since December, possibly since November. I have been trying to be patient and to give you the time you needed and not to make assumptions." "You were very patient," she said. "It was the hardest thing I have done in years," he said, and there was something in the admission that made her chest ache with a tenderness so strong it was nearly painful. She reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand, and he held it with a care that was almost reverent, and they sat like that in the warm May evening while the nighthawks wheeled above them, and the flag moved gently in the breeze. And for the first time in 3 years and more, Cora Pritchard felt the particular peace of not being alone. Summer brought the cattle drive season and all the noise and dust and rough commerce that came with it. Drovers passed through Calico Creek in numbers, filling the saloon and the boarding house and the main road with their particular kind of exhausted, sunburned energy. Clark was busy through June and July with his own cattle operations, the Wallace spread running a larger herd than it had in the years of his early ownership, and Cora saw less of him during the height of the season, though he never failed to ride by at least every few days. The town was not without its troubles that summer. 3 drovers got into a serious altercation at the saloon in mid-June that left one man with a broken arm and another with injuries serious enough to require the doctor's attention for several days. The new sheriff, Tom Briggs, who had held the post since Eli's death, handled it with reasonable competence, but there were nights when Cora heard the raised voices from town on the south wind and thought of her husband and the life he had given to keeping this place orderly. She told Clark about it one evening, about how the drover's violence had stirred something up in her that she usually kept very carefully stored. "I miss him," she said. "Not the way I used to. It is different now. But I miss him, and I think about whether he would have handled it differently and what he would say about the town now." "Those things do not have to resolve themselves," Clark said. "You can love someone new and still carry grief for someone you lost. It is not a contradiction." She looked at him. "You have thought about this." "I have had to think about it," he said simply. "With Rebecca, with the way I felt about starting to care for you, I had to decide for myself that one was not a betrayal of the other." "And you decided?" "I decided that Rebecca would have liked you enormously," he said, "and that she would have been very glad I did not spend the rest of my life alone because of her." Cora was quiet for a moment, turning that over. "Eli was the same," she said. "He was not a possessive man. He was a generous man. I think he would have been glad too." "I think so," Clark said. They sat with that for a while, the particular quiet gravity of 2 people who have brought their grief into the same room and found that it does not diminish but transforms. He kissed her for the first time on a Thursday evening in late July, on her porch, after a supper that Lily had been dispatched to bed from an hour before. It was a quiet kiss, unhurried, with both of his hands holding her face as though she were something both precious and real, and she kissed him back with the full force of all the months she had spent pretending she was not in love with him. When they separated, both of them were very still for a moment. "Well," Cora said. "Well," Clark agreed. And then she laughed and he laughed, and it was the best thing that had happened on that porch since Eli had built the rocking chair and sat in it the first night, and said that he had never been so happy in his life, which memory Cora carried with her always, and which she did not feel was diminished one grain by the laughter she was sharing now with a different man who sat in the chair beside hers, and had kissed her, as though she were the thing he had been traveling toward for a long time. August was full of heat and bees and the lazy industry of high summer, and Cora Pritchard and Clark Wallace were what they were now, which was unmistakably and visibly in love. And Calico Creek, which had been quietly rooting for this development since at least December, responded with the satisfied collective sigh of a town whose preferred narrative has arrived at its expected resolution. Clark began to spend more time at the Pritchard place in the evenings, and Lily had decided that he was, in her considered 8-year-old assessment, the second best man she had ever known, with her father retaining the top position by dint of history and the carving he had made her that she still kept on her windowsill. Clark had accepted second place with the gravity it deserved, and the two of them had developed a relationship of considerable warmth built largely on his willingness to answer any question she asked, no matter how complicated, and her willingness to tell him when his answers were not good enough. In August he taught her to play checkers, and she beat him 3 times out of 5, which she recorded in her school notebook as a verified fact. He brought Cora wildflowers one afternoon, not a cultivated bouquet, just a handful of the kind of flowers that grew along the road, yellow and purple and sturdy-stemmed, and presented them with the sheepishness of a man who has decided to do a romantic thing and is not entirely comfortable with the decision. She put them in a blue glass jar on the kitchen windowsill, and they stood there for 2 weeks before she finally had to let them go. And she pressed one of the purple ones in the back of her prayer book where it lived for years after. September arrived, and with it the particular golden quality of late summer going autumn that was the most beautiful time in Calico Creek, when the light turned the color of good whiskey, and the air smelled of dry grass and far-off rain. Cora brought out her mending kit and examined the flag for the autumn season, finding the expected where the small separations along the horizontal seams that the summer heat always loosened. She was on the porch doing this work when Clark arrived on a Saturday afternoon and came up the porch steps with a look on his face that she had learned to identify as his preparation for something look. He sat in his chair and watched her work for a few minutes. "I want to ask you something," he said. "All right," she said. He turned his hat in his hands. "I want to ask you to marry me." She set the flag down in her lap. "I know that is a significant thing," he said, continuing with the careful deliberateness of a man who has prepared remarks and intends to deliver them. "I know you have built your life here on your own terms, and I do not want to disrupt that. I would not ask you to leave this house or change anything that you have built here. I would like nothing more than to come into what you have made and be part of it." He paused. "I would like to be Lily's stepfather if she would have me, though I would ask her separately because she is her own person and that is her right." Cora looked at him for a long moment. The flag was in her hands, the porch creaked. The afternoon light was the color of honey. "Clark," she said, "you are the most careful man I have ever met." "I know I am," he said. "I know it can be annoying." "It is not annoying," she said. "It is one of the things I love about you. You think before you speak and you mean what you say and you do not rush things that should not be rushed." She folded her hands over the flag. "Yes, I will marry you." He let out a breath that he appeared to have been holding since approximately November, and the relief and joy in his face were so unguarded and genuine that she felt tears move into her eyes before she could prevent them. He crossed the space between the chairs and took both her hands, and she stood up, and he kissed her with a warmth that was completely different from the careful quiet of the July kiss, something fuller and more assured, and the flag was folded between their hands. Inside the house, Lily had apparently been watching from the window, because she burst through the door a moment later with an energy that suggested she had been waiting for permission to celebrate. "Does this mean he is going to live here?" she demanded, looking between them with bright and calculating eyes. "It means we are going to be a family," Cora said. Lily looked at Clark. "Will you bring your horses?" "We can discuss the horses," Clark said. "How many?" "Lily," Cora said. "At least 4, Clark said. Lily appeared to find this an acceptable beginning, and returned inside to announce the development to Captain the Barn Cat, who was reportedly sleeping in the kitchen and would need to be informed. Clark looked at Cora over the top of Lily's retreating energy, and they were both laughing again. And the flag was in Cora's hands, and the September sun was warm, and Calico Creek spread itself south and gold in the afternoon, and everything that had been broken or frayed or ragged at the edges was, in this moment, mended. The wedding was held in November, which Cora chose with deliberateness, because November was the month she had first had him inside her house, the month he had brought her the grommet sets and sat at her kitchen table and talked about his father's flag, and it seemed right that the season of that beginning should hold the formal start of what they were becoming. Reverend Marsh performed the ceremony in the Calico Creek Church on a clear Saturday morning when the sky was so blue it looked painted, and the whole town came, which was not a surprise, and many of them cried, which was also not a surprise. Lily served as Cora's attendant with a gravity appropriate to the office, wearing a dress that Cora had made from blue calico, and which Lily had declared the finest thing she had ever owned. Clark's ranch hand, a steady young man named Dix who had worked for the Wallace spread for 4 years and was Clark's most trusted employee, served as his witness. Dix was 22 and visibly nervous in his good suit, and he kept his eyes straight forward during the ceremony with the focus of a man performing an important duty. When Reverend Marsh pronounced them married, and Clark took Cora's face in his hands and kissed her, the church erupted in the kind of sound that a congregation produces when they have been quietly invested in a particular outcome for the better part of a year. Even old Pete Sutter, who had been barbering in Calico Creek for 30 years and claimed to be unmoved by sentiment, was observed to blow his nose with considerable force at approximately that moment. The reception was held in the Grange Hall with tables of food brought by what appeared to be every woman in the county, and there was fiddle music and dancing, and Lily danced with Clark for 2 songs running, and then declared that dancing was harder than it looked and retired to investigate the dessert table. Cora danced with her new husband in the middle of the Grange Hall floor with the whole town watching and did not mind the watching at all, because she had been careful and patient and had built her life on her own terms. And this was still her life, only larger now, only fuller, and the man holding her was one she had chosen freely and with her whole self. They did not leave for a honeymoon trip, because it was November and travel was difficult, and the ranch and the house both needed tending. But Clark had prepared the bedroom at the Pritchard place with fresh curtains and a new lamp, and a vase of dried flowers that he had clearly spent some time assembling. And when Cora saw it, she stood in the doorway for a moment before saying anything, because it was exactly the kind of thing she would not have expected him to do, and yet was entirely what he would do. "You are a surprising man," she told him. "Only occasionally," he said. "The winter of 1878 into 1879 was long but not unkind." Clark's 4 horses, which had been the subject of extensive negotiation, arrived at the Pritchard property in early December and joined Cora's 2 in the paddock, which required some expansion of the paddock fence, which Clark and Dix and a third hand named Birch managed over the course of 2 cold days while Lily supervised and offered opinions. Captain the Barn Cat established an immediate and baffling friendship with the largest of Clark's horses, a gray gelding named Copper, and could thereafter be regularly found sleeping in the gray's stall. Clark brought order to the property in the quiet, unassuming way that a capable man brings order to a situation, not by overriding what was already there, but by filling in the gaps. He repaired the fence sections that Cora had been managing with temporary fixes for 2 years. He reinforced the paddock walls. He split more wood than 2 winters would require. He rode out to the Wallace spread several times a week to manage his own operations, keeping Dix and Birch running the ranch in his increasing absence from it, and began the process of thinking about how to consolidate what had been 2 separate operations into something that served both. Cora continued to run her household as she always had, and Clark understood without being told that this was not something to interfere with, that her authority in her own house was complete and not negotiable, and that his role was partnership and not management. He was good at understanding this, better than she had expected any man to be, and when she asked him how he had come to be so reasonable about it, he said that Rebecca had been a strong woman too, and that he had learned early in his first marriage that a man who tried to diminish the women around him was a fool who would spend his life surrounded by smaller versions of people who should have been larger. "Rebecca sounds like someone I would have liked," Cora said. "You would have argued constantly," he said, "and liked each other enormously for it." January 1879 passed in the cold, interior pleasures of a house that was now shared and warm, and in February Cora realized, with a combination of joy and disbelief, and the practical understanding that her body was a reliable narrator, that she was expecting a child. She told Clark on a Tuesday evening. She simply said it, sitting at the kitchen table after supper, with the directness she applied to all important things. "I am expecting a baby." He went very still. Then he moved with a speed and deliberateness that she would not have predicted, coming around the table to her and taking her hands in his and looking at her with something in his face that was several emotions running together, joy and love and a vulnerability she had rarely seen from him. "Cora," he said. "I know," she said. "Are you?" "I am very well," she said, "and very glad." He kissed her hands, both of them, and then he sat beside her and put his arm around her. And for a while they simply sat together in the kitchen, with the lamp burning warm between them and the knowledge of the child growing between them like the green things that grew every spring without being asked. Lily was told at breakfast the next morning and received the information with the serious consideration she gave to all significant news. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" she asked. "We will not know until it arrives," Cora said. "I would like a brother," Lily said. "I already know everything about being a girl. A brother would be educational." Clark looked at Cora over their daughter's head with an expression of complete helplessness in the face of this logic, and Cora pressed her lips together against the smile. Spring came again, the second spring of the flag under Cora's married hands, and she brought it out for the seasonal inspection with the particular attentiveness she gave it every year. Clark sat with her on the porch now for this ritual, having understood its significance, and he watched her work with his hat on his knee and the view of the greening country spreading before them. "You know," he said one afternoon in March, watching her turn the flag in her hands, "I think half the town has been waiting for years to see who would stop long enough to understand what you were doing out here." "And what am I doing?" she asked, glancing up at him. "Tending something," he said. "Not letting it fall apart because it is inconvenient or because no one else is watching." She looked at the flag. "It is just a flag." "It is not just a flag," he said. "You know that." She did know that. The flag was Eli's honor and the town's history and her own refusal to let the important things go unmended, and it was also, she had come to understand, a kind of statement about herself, about the woman she had been in the years between Eli and now, patient and careful and capable of the work that most people did not even notice needed doing. "You stopped to watch," she said. "I could not help it," he said. "I was passing by and there you were, mending the flag in the October light, and I thought I had never seen anything so determined and so beautiful and so completely unconscious of being either." She looked at him. She had heard him say many things over the months, and she had paid attention to all of them, because Clark Wallace said very few things he did not mean, and every word he offered was worth the receiving. But this particular thing landed in her with a completeness that she felt in the same place she felt the first warm days after a long winter. "You should have stopped that first evening," she said. "I know," he said. "I was working up to it. I came back the next day." "I know." "You did not stop." "I was still working up to it," he said, and she laughed and he laughed, and the flag was in her hands and the March sky was everywhere above them. The summer of 1879 was a busy one. The ranch operations were going well, and Clark made an arrangement with a cattle buyer out of Fort Worth that secured a solid price for the fall drive, which would be the first substantial drive the Wallace spread had made in 2 years. Dix and Birch managed most of the daily running of the ranch, and Clark rode out several mornings a week, while Cora managed the household and her garden and the apple orchard, which was going to have a very good yield that year. There were changes in Calico Creek that summer that were not entirely easy to witness. A family named Argueta, who had been farming a small spread east of town for 6 years, was pressured off their land by a group of men working for one of the larger land interests that was consolidating property throughout the county. Sheriff Briggs handled it with less force than Eli would have, and the result was that the Argueta family loaded their wagon and left in August, which cast a shadow over the town that some people chose not to look directly at. Clark had spoken to Briggs about it, and Cora knew he had because he came home from that conversation with the particular quietness of a man who has not gotten what he hoped for and is managing his frustration. "Briggs says his hands are tied," he told her. "His hands are not tied," she said. "He is afraid of Caldwell's money." "Yes," Clark said. "My husband would not have been afraid of Caldwell's money," she said. "No," Clark said. "He would not have been." They both sat with the injustice of it for a while. The way that good people sometimes had to sit with the things that money and power made possible in a country that was still, in 1879, working out what kind of place it intended to be. What Clark did, in his quiet way, was ride out to where the Argueta family had camped on the road east and offer them temporary shelter in the old caretaker's house on the far corner of the Wallace property, which was unoccupied and sound. He did this without announcement or expectation of credit, and the Argueta family, a husband named Lewis and his wife Rosa and their 3 children, accepted with a dignity that was in no way diminished by the need for the help. They stayed through the fall and into winter, and Louis Argueta turned out to be a skilled hand with horses, and by the following spring he was working for the Wallace spread, and his family had found a more permanent situation in the county, and the caretaker's house had been repaired and expanded and was now a proper home again. Cora thought about this often, about the way Clark did the right thing quietly, without performance, the way she mended the flag without expecting anyone to notice. She thought they had recognized each other, really, from the first evening. 2 people who did the necessary work because it was necessary, not because anyone was watching. October arrived, and with it, the particular weight of the season and the particular relevance of it, because it had been a full year since that first evening, since Clark's horse had slowed on the road outside, and he had looked at her flag with that expression of old grief, and she had said evening, and he had said evening back. She was on the porch on the anniversary of that meeting, in the same chair, with the flag across her lap for the October inspection, when she heard the familiar hoofbeats slow on the road. She looked up. Clark was there on the bay horse, but he had not come from town. He had ridden around from the north to come past the house on the road, specifically to approach it as he had that first time. He sat there on the road and looked at her and at the flag. "Evening," she said. The corner of his mouth shifted. "Evening, ma'am," he said, in the careful voice he had used that first time. "Fine flag." "It wants to come apart every season," she said. "I just refuse to let it." He dismounted and came up the porch steps and sat in his chair beside her, and she went on mending the flag, and he watched her in the October light, and they were both aware with a fullness that words could not adequately carry of the distance they had traveled between that evening and this one. "A year," she said. "A year," he said. Her hands were on the flag and her belly was round with the child due in December. And the apple orchard had been harvested, and the paddock had 6 horses in it. And Captain the barn cat was asleep somewhere inside, and Lily was doing her reading lesson at the kitchen table. And the flag was almost mended. And Calico Creek spread itself south in the last golden light of the October sun. November passed in the careful preparations of a house expecting a new arrival, and December came cold and clear and waiting. Cora was attended by Mrs. Hale, the town midwife who had delivered half of Calico Creek's population over 30 years of practice, and by Clark, who paced the porch with a sustained dedication that Lily observed and reported on at intervals. "He has done 7 full lengths of the porch," Lily reported, appearing in the bedroom doorway with the precision of a small journalist. "That is normal," Mrs. Hale said without looking up. "He looks worried," Lily said. "That is also normal," Mrs. Hale said. "Mama does not look worried," Lily said. "Your mother," said Mrs. Hale, "is an extraordinary woman. Now close the door and let him pace." On a December night in 1879, with the stars out and the frost hard on the ground and the flag taken inside for the winter, Cora and Clark's son was born. He arrived with healthy lungs and a remarkable quantity of dark hair, and when Mrs. Hale put him in Cora's arms and Cora looked at him with that absolute and immediate love that arrives with newborns without introduction or preamble, she felt the full weight of her life as it now was, enormous and whole and carefully mended. Clark was brought in from the porch. He looked at the baby in Cora's arms with the face of a man who has been given something so much larger than he expected that he does not know where to stand. His eyes went bright in a way that Cora had never seen before, and she reached for his hand and he took it and sat beside her on the bed. "Hello," he said to the baby, very quietly. The baby made no response, being busy with the essential work of existing. "He has your hair," Cora said. "He has your chin," Clark said. Lily, who had been permitted to come in, stood at the foot of the bed in her nightgown with her arms folded and studied the new arrival with the critical attention of someone assessing a significant purchase. "He is very small," she said. "You were very small too," Cora said. "I was not that small," Lily said with some dignity. They named him Samuel, for Clark's father, who had kept the flag until Sherman's army came and had never put it back up. Samuel Eli Wallace, for Eli Pritchard, who had been a good man and a good sheriff, and who was honored in the naming. And Cora thought that somewhere in the wide universe Eli Pritchard heard it and approved. Spring came again, the spring of 1880, and the flag came back out for its seasonal mending with an extra pair of hands at the table, because Lily had decided that she was old enough to learn the work and Cora had agreed, and they sat together at the kitchen table on an April evening, the flag spread between them, Cora's hands guiding Lily's smaller ones through the basic running stitch that was the foundation of all the rest. "You have to make them even," Cora said. "Each stitch the same size. If they are uneven, the seam will not hold." "Why does it matter if they are even?" Lily said, not quite a question. "Because the things you build carefully last longer than the things you build in a hurry," Cora said. Lily considered this with the philosophical seriousness she brought to most things. "Papa builds things carefully," she said. "He does," Cora said. "Is that why he lasted?" Lily asked. Cora looked at her daughter across the flag. Lily was looking down at her stitching, pulling the needle through with a concentration that made her tongue come slightly between her lips, and she asked the question with the straightforward calm of a child who has simply observed something and put it into words. "Yes," Cora said softly. "I think that is why." Clark came in from outside at that point, carrying Samuel, who was 4 months old and had recently discovered that the world was full of interesting things to look at, and intended to look at all of them. And Clark stood in the kitchen doorway holding the baby against his chest, and looking at his wife and his older daughter working on the flag together. And the expression on his face was the kind that a man carries when he is fully aware that he is in the middle of the best moment of his life. "What are we doing?" he asked. "We are learning to mend the flag," Lily said without looking up. It takes a long time and the stitches have to be even. They do, Clark said. He came in and sat at the table and settled Samuel against his knee and watched them work. And the lamplight was warm, and the evening was coming on outside the windows with the gentle authority of April. And somewhere out on the porch, the flag's pole stood ready, waiting for the work to be finished. The way things that have been cared for always wait with patience for the hands that tend them. Summer arrived, and the whole country bloomed with the particular extravagance of a Texas summer that had decided not to be modest about itself. The apple orchard was heavy with fruit before August. The horses were fine, and the cattle were good, and Dix had recently announced his engagement to a young woman from Farley named Me, which prompted a congratulations party at the Wallace Ranch house that lasted most of a Saturday and involved more food than any sensible gathering required. Samuel, at 7 months, had become an enthusiastic participant in all things and a fierce opponent of sleep, which was a characteristic he appeared to have inherited from no one that could be identified, and which Cora and Clark managed with the bleary good humor of parents who know it is temporary. Lily, now 9 and of the opinion that she was approximately 42 in terms of responsibility and wisdom, had taken on the role of Samuel's most devoted entertainer. She would spend 20 minutes making faces at him until he laughed, which he did with his whole body, a full-body laugh that started somewhere below his knees, and which could reliably bring every adult in the house to the doorway. Clark took Lily riding that summer on a proper horse for the first time, on the most gentle of the Wallace horses, a brown mare named Bess, and Lily sat in the saddle with the upright posture of someone who has been thinking about this moment for a long time and intends to do it correctly. She rode around the paddock 3 times and then declared she was ready for the open range, which Clark said was perhaps next summer, which Lily accepted with strategic patience. The flag flew through the summer on its porch pole, and Cora checked it at the end of August and found it in remarkably good shape, better than it had been at any summer's end in her memory. And she thought this was because it had been mended so thoroughly and carefully over the years that the wear had less and less undone material to work on. Autumn came gold and cool, and with it the particular anniversary feeling that October carried now, the year and the year before and the year before that, the flag in her hands and the road outside and the man who had stopped. She was on the porch with the flag on an October afternoon when Clark came up the steps and stopped and looked at her and looked at the flag, and the afternoon light was that exact shade of amber that it had been 3 years ago, and his face was as familiar to her now as the flag's own pattern. "I have been thinking," he said. "That is never an uncomplicated statement from you," she said. He sat in his chair. Samuel was inside with Lily, who had taken charge of the afternoon with the efficiency of someone who had clearly made plans of her own. "I think we should expand the house," he said, "before the next one arrives." She went still over her mending. "The next one." He looked at her with that quiet attention. "You have been different this past month," he said. "You had the same quality in November of last year. I may be wrong." She set the flag down. "You are not wrong," she said. He exhaled slowly, the way he had when she had agreed to marry him, the long releasing breath of relief and joy combined. "How are you?" he asked. "I am very well," she said. "I am always very well." "I know," he said. He reached over and covered her hand with his. "You are the most well person I have ever known." "That may be the least romantic thing you have ever said to me," she observed. "You are also," he said, "the person I am most grateful to be building this life beside, and I intend to keep saying that until one of us can no longer hear the other." She turned her hand over and held his. The flag was in her other hand, the flag she had been mending through every season for 4 years now, carrying it from its origins as a symbol of grief through all the seasons of her solitude and into this life that was nothing she had planned and everything she had needed. "The house does need another room," she said. "At least 2, he said. "If Lily is going to have her own room, which she will have opinions about." She will have opinions about the size, shape, location, and direction of the windows, Cora said. She already has, Clark said. I believe she has drawn a diagram. Cora laughed, and he laughed with her, and the flag was in her hand, and the October sun was warm, and the road was there below the porch where it had always been, going north and south through the country, carrying people past each other and occasionally, when conditions were right, and a person was paying the right kind of attention, bringing them to a stop outside a house where a woman was mending a flag and refusing to let it come apart. The house was expanded through November and into December, with Clark and Dix and Louis Argueta, who had become a genuine friend over the year, doing the framing and the building work in the cold weather with the determination of men who know when something needs to be finished before winter sets in entirely. Lily did, in fact, have opinions about her room. She wanted a window on the east wall specifically, to see the sunrise, and she got it. And she was observed that first morning to sit on her windowsill in her nightgown, watching the sky go from black to rose to gold, with the complete absorption of someone present at an important event. The new year came, 1881, and with it another spring, and with that spring a second child, a girl this time, who arrived in March with the same healthy lungs as her brother, and with a quantity of red hair that clearly came from somewhere deep in family history and could be accounted for by no one present. They named her Eliza Me Wallace, and she was from the first moment a person of strong opinions and significant volume, qualities that Lily observed with the careful attention of someone taking notes. She is going to be difficult, Lily told Clark with a 9-year-old's frank assessment. She is going to be magnificent, Clark said. Those are not mutually exclusive, Lily said. Clark looked at Cora over Lily's head for the second time in the history of this family, and wore the same expression of complete helplessness in the face of logical truth. And Cora pressed her lips together again, and rocked the baby, and let the feeling of the full life around her settle into her bones like warmth after a cold ride. The flag flew through the spring and summer of 1881, mended and sound, and in the autumn Cora sat on the porch with Lily beside her and both of them with their sewing kits out, the flag across both their laps, the work divided between them. Samuel was on the porch boards playing with the carved horse that Clark had made him, which was a cousin to the one Lily had received years before. Eliza was asleep in the cradle inside, having exhausted herself with the morning's opinions. Clark came up the porch steps from the yard, where he had been attending to a loose board on the paddock gate, and he stopped at the top of the steps and looked at the scene before him. His wife and his older daughter working on the flag together in the afternoon light. His son on the porch boards, the country golden and wide to the south. He stood for a long moment. "You are blocking the light," Lily said without looking up. "My apologies," he said and sat in his chair. Cora glanced at him. His expression was one she recognized and loved, the quiet fullness of a man who is where he belongs and knows it. "Hand me the red thread," she said. He found it in her sewing basket and handed it across. His fingers brushed hers in the passing, a small thing, the kind of small thing that accumulates over years into the texture of a shared life, and she threaded her needle and went back to the flag. The flag had 37 stars in its blue canton, each one standing for a state in the Union, and 37 times Cora had counted them, running her finger over the points of each one, the way she had counted them every season since Eli had put it in her arms and the town council had said it was a symbol of honor. It was still that. It was also a record now, stitched through with every season she had spent tending it, the winters and summers and autumns and springs, the years of solitude and the years that had come after. The man who had stopped one October evening because something about the light and the flag and the woman mending it had held him, and who had never quite managed to pass by again. She tied off the last thread on the autumn mending and held the flag up to the light and examined every inch of it with the care she had never stopped bringing to the work. It was in the best condition it had been in since the first year. The stripes were even. The canton was sound. The grommets, those grommets Clark had brought her in November 3 years past, were firm and bright. She folded it along the red and white stripes, the way a soldier would fold it, and held it for a moment before rising to hang it back on the pole. Clark stood and took it from her and hung it himself, with a care and deliberateness that was its own kind of statement, straightening it until the stripes ran true and the canton was properly aligned. He stepped back and looked at it against the October sky. The flag moved in the light October wind, its colors sharp and clear, mended and flying and entirely itself. "Good," Cora said. "Good," Clark said. She took his hand, and he held it, and they stood on the porch of the house they had made together while their children played around them, and the country stretched out golden and immense in every direction. And the flag they had both come to in their separate ways flew over all of it, over the town and the road and the years, over what had been lost and what had been found, and what had been built so carefully that it would hold through every season to come. Inside the house, Eliza woke from her nap and announced this fact to the world, and Lily put down her sewing and went in, because she was a girl who understood responsibility, and Samuel brought his carved horse to his father and asked to be picked up, which Clark did, settling the boy on his hip with the ease of a man who has done it 1,000 times and intends to do it 1,000 more. Cora looked at all of it, at her husband holding their son and her daughter's voice coming from inside settling her sister, at the flag flying sound and whole above the porch, at the road running south toward town and north, toward the ranch and beyond that, toward all the wide country that was still becoming what it would be. And she felt the thing she had learned was the most honest word for her life, not recovered or rebuilt, but mended. Carefully, deliberately, stitch by patient stitch, mended, and holding.